What's up, my producer friends? Another monster here, anothermonsterproductions.com. Welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to another video. Today I want to do a walkthrough of the Synthwave track, which I just produced yesterday actually and finished up this morning. I finished up mixing it. I am pretty happy with it. It's definitely a little bit different than a lot of Synthwave that I've heard. I'm still pretty new to Synthwave and I haven't really listened to a whole lot of it, but from what I have heard, it seems like people don't tend to worry about the mix as much. The kick and the snare are not usually as prevalent as I would have thought they'd be, considering it's, 80s inspired music. I've always, like, the 80s music that I grew up listening to and that I loved, one of the characteristics of it was, having that, like, in your face, overly compressed and heavily reverbed snare sound. And then in my track here, which we'll take a look at just in a second, the kick sample that I used is more of almost an EDM sounding kick. And I feel like this track turned out a little more polished than a lot of Synthwave that you'll hear. So personally, I like it. Hopefully you like it as well. I don't want to do too much talking here, but basically my goal with this is just to walk through the whole process of how I put everything together, how I processed everything, and then hopefully you guys, if you're trying to, can learn a little something from it. Let's go ahead and take a listen and then we'll jump in. Okay, so the first thing I did was I started with a bass line. I used this preset called Blue Sunday SF, which is a harmless preset. It's just a stock FL Studio plugin. By the way, I used all stock FL Studio synthesizers in this track. Let's go ahead and take a look at the piano roll. I brought it into the piano roll, and I had kind of this pattern that I had in mind, which I then just started playing around, came up with a bass line and kind of a chord progression, which sounds like this. And then I loaded it into my mixer, and I basically put a filter on it, which the only reason for that was to filter it in during the intro. Kind of goes in before the beat drops or kicks in. And then I added an EQ, which looks like this. I took out a little bit of the sub frequencies because it felt a little bass heavy down there. I brought it down 2.1 decibels, and I boosted it up from around 136 hertz up to around 600 hertz, about 0.4 to 0.5 decibels there, just to get a little bit more of that information. It just felt like it was lacking in that region just a little bit. And then I went ahead and added a sound goodizer, which looks like this. Very little sound goodizer on it. Just wanted to add a little bit of saturation to bring out a little bit more of the higher information in that sound. So yeah, that's how I processed that. All right, so the next thing that I did was I added my drum samples, which I started with my kick. The kick that I chose was actually the least 80s sounding kick out of the kit that I made for myself, which I just put some samples together so that I could have something to reference quickly. But I ended up deciding on this kick called GRV kick. It's a stock FL Studio kick, and it sounds like this with no processing. I decided to add some EQ on it, which makes it sound like this. So I wanted to bring up some of this around the 8.6 kHz region. So I boosted that 4.4 decibels, and then I brought out a little bit around, I reduced -3 decibels around 300 hertz, and a little bit around the 600 hertz. And then I got rid of some of that down there. So again, this is what it sounds like after EQ. Then I added some compression, which looks like this. Pretty high ratio, pretty heavily compressed there. Sounds like this. So it gives it super punch. And then I also added this Rough Rider, which is another compressor, which I used a preset called Just a Touch. It's basically this compressor you can get some pretty crazy sounds out of. It's a free download, so I'll leave a link in the description. But with that compression, it sounds like this. All right, so the next thing that I did was I went ahead and added my snare, which I layered 3 sounds. I didn't do this all at the same time. I kind of did it over the period of making the track. But the first sound that I started with was this, which is just a 707 snare sound. It sounds like this. And I loaded it into my mixer before processing. It sounds like this. I put on some EQ, and actually I think I did all the processing after already layering the snares to kind of make them fit together better. But basically I took out a lot of reduced -7 decibels here, reduced about -8 decibels here, and you can kind of see I boosted a little bit in the 300 or 3K hertz region. Added reverb on it, which looks like this. Added another Rough Rider, and I'm not 100% on I did definitely choose one of the presets, but I don't remember if it was the same one as the one before. But that sounds like this. Oh. That's with the Rough Rider on. Added a sound goodizer, which makes it sound like this. And then added some more compression, which looks like this. All right, so then I layered it with this snare, which sounds like this. Which this snare, all I did was add a reverb on it, which looks like this, giant reverb. And then I layered it with this clunky effects, which sounds like this. And all together, they sound like this. All right, so after my snare, I added the hi-hat, which basically I just used the 707 hi-hat. It sounds like, let me actually click pattern 2. It sounds like this. Brought it into my piano roll here, and I changed the velocity to give it kind of a almost sidechain type feel. I loaded it into my mixer and I added an EQ, which looks like this. Added a stereo shaper, which looks like this. Basically, stereo shaping just makes it sound super spread out. And then I added a reverb, which looks like this. And I went ahead and panned it pretty far to the right. But because of the stereo shaper, you can't really hear it. I'm actually streaming this in mono, so you're not going to be able to hear it the way I am, but it actually still sounds like there's a lot of information still coming out of the speaker because of the stereo shaper that I added on it. But after putting that, I went ahead and layered it with another hi-hat, which sounds like this. And then also a ride cymbal. All right, so next I added some toms. Actually, I don't think I did this next, but it's what we're going to be doing next. I added these toms, which let's go ahead and go to our pattern 6. Basically, again, it's a 707 tom. If you guys are ever going to try and make some synthwave, 707 kit is a good starting point. There's a lot of good samples in there. But the toms sound like this. And basically what I did was I just sort of, found different keys where I liked where the snare sounded, played them out, and then I did that on this one too. Brought it into my mixer. And I added some EQ on it, which looks like this. Added reverb. And then I added a dimension expander. I ended up muting it because I decided I actually liked it better without the dimension expander on it. But that just kind of made it sound wider, did a little bit of sort of stereo separation on it. Okay, so the next thing that I did was I went ahead and added a crash. And basically, as far as the crash goes, I loaded up into my mixer. I found this Crash 5. I don't even know exactly sure. I think I got this from my kit, which I'll leave a free link in the description for you guys. It's like Monster Samples Volume 1, which is just a bunch of good high quality drum samples, which I have accumulated over the years and put in a pack. And I think it's Cymbals Crashes. I think, no, this is it. So this is the sample that I used for that. Again, I'll put a link in the description of this video for a free download for that pack if you guys want to get that. So this is what it sounds like. And I loaded it into my mixer. By the way, guys, what I'm doing, I'm holding Alt and using the arrows on my keyboard to move this left and right on the mixer. So it's kind of a keyboard shortcut you can do to kind of quickly move stuff on the mixer. But anyway, as far as processing goes on this, I added an EQ, which looks like this. I added some delay, which looks like this. And then I added a reverb, which looks like this. All right, so altogether, our drums are sounding like this, along with their bass that we added. All right, so the next thing that I wanted to do was I wanted to add some chords. And what I did was let's actually click this. I brought in another preset from Synth, which I don't really have very much experience using this synth, but it's again another stock preset within FL Studio, or stock synth. And I went in here, I found a preset that I liked. It was called House. I don't think I tweaked it any, but I brought it into my mixer, and I did do some processing on it here. I added an isotope vinyl, which looks like this. So it's got a little wear and warp depth. So let me actually take the processing off. I'll remember that this was muted, but let's do that. And let's kind of listen to what it sounds like just as is. So almost like an organ sound. I added the vinyl, which sounds like this. And it gave it a little bit of warp, which I love that in certain situations. It makes it sound really cool. I had the stereo shaper off, but I did add a dimension expander, which basically put the size pretty much all the way up, dry wet midway. Again, this is another free plugin. I'll leave a link in the description for you guys. It's Dimension Expander by X4 Records, and let's listen to it with that. Almost no point in listening to it with that since you can't hear the stereo image anyway. But then I added an EQ, which looks like this. And then I added another isotope vinyl, which that was to add just more wear on one certain section of the track where I wanted that. So next I added this ARP. I wanted to create kind of an arpeggio. It's a common thing that you'll hear in a lot of synthwave and 80s music. And this is what it sounds like. Actually, that's not what it sounds like. This is what it sounds like. So for this, I chose this preset, which I found in Harmless Synth. It's called Neo Retro 1. And basically, I loaded it into my mixer. And I have a fruity filter going on it, which actually that's just for the intro so that it kind of filters in when the beat drops. I have this M auto pan, which again, it's hard for you to hear exactly what it's doing, but basically I have it set at a pan law of +6 decibels, a rate of 2.8, which essentially that's every other note, like every time a note hits, it's going back and forth. And then I have a depth of about 50%. This is another free plugin, which I think it's still free. I'll try and include a link in the description for this one as well. Lots of free plugins here that I'm using, which are pretty cool, great plugins. So, and then I added an isotope vinyl, which looks like this. Again, I added warp depth and a little wear, and then I added some delay. So all those things together make it sound like this. All right, so at this point, I had actually decided that I wanted to, like this part was obviously not, the song wasn't not going to start off like that. I decided to go ahead and start on my intro, and I found this synth, which, let me unmute everything and I'll just kind of play it from the beginning. But basically, this synth sounds like this. And actually, there's a lot going on. So basically, this is a pad that I found. It's called Diablo TE. It's in GMS, which is another stock FL Studio synth, which I have actually, up until this track, never used this synthesizer before, but it's got a lot of really cool 80s sounding stuff, and it's a pretty cool synth from what I could tell. I haven't really tried to do very much sound design in it. I used all presets in this, but it's pretty cool. So got my preset, loaded it up into the mixer, added an EQ on it, which looks like this. So what did I do? I didn't even... Oh, you know what? This was just for automation. I automated one of these things right here probably. So basically there's no processing going on that anyway. So that's cool. So after that, moving on with kind of the intro, I added this atmospheric synth, which sounds like this. Which, let's take a look at this. Again, this is another one of these GMS synths. It's called GMS, let's see. It's called Landing TE. Sounds like that. And then I kind of drew it out and had it going higher. And then even higher here, just to kind of build it up throughout the intro. And then this is where I actually used the filters that I had on my bass and then also on my arpeggio, kind of going up into the drop. All right, so at this point, I still felt like something was missing from this main section here. And I had the idea to try and add a vocal sample, which for those of you who follow my YouTube channel, you probably know that whenever I get the chance, I'll try and throw in some vocal samples and kind of turn them into essentially like a synth or an instrument type sound. There's something really organic and just big. You can get like a bigger sound out of them than you can with a lot of synths if you process them the right way. So, excuse me. So what I did with this was I found this vocal sample, which it's one of my artists that I work with, and I essentially, let me actually see if I can take off all the processing first. So a lot of processing going on here. This is what the sample sounds like. And actually, let me go into my piano roll so I can show you exactly what I did here. So this is the sound. I'll just play it down here. And of course, that's pitched down an octave. So I guess that is what the original sample sounded like, which is pitched up an octave or two even from the original sample. Excuse me. So I started down here, and because that was a better note for me, and then I slid it up so it sounds like this. And then I brought it into my mixer. First thing I did was I added some EQ. I added like a radio effect EQ. Then I added, well, let's take a listen. It sounds like this. And then I added a fruity distortion or fruity fast distortion, which I used this preset called fuzz. And then I just brought down the mix because it's super loud. So that sounds like this. Next, I added some reverb, or another reverb too, which looks like this. And then I added a delay, which sounds like this. And let's actually take a look at that. So this is what the delay looks like. Then I added another reverb, which looks like this. So pretty big size, a lot of decay, almost 100% wet. Just making this sound super big here and heavily reverbed. That's kind of the sound I'm going for. Next thing I did was an auto pitch. Again, this was another free plugin, kind of like the Auto Pan by the same company. So you could check that out as well. Next, I did an isotope vinyl, which looks like this. And basically, I just added some wear on it, which makes it sound like this. Okay, and then next we added a stereo shaper, which just, again, spreads it out, makes it wide. Then I added a fruity filter, which that was, again, to filter it during the intro when it comes in. So after I added this vocal, I was listening back to it, and I felt like I heard this kind of melody in my head, which at first I was like, oh, I should do that with the vocal. And then I decided, let me try it with another synth, which sounds kind of similar to the vocal, just to give it a little bit of variation. So I found this synth here, which sounds like this. Let me actually just do solo it. And I used, well, here, first of all, let's take a look at the synth. It's another GMS. It's called Portalead, and I loaded it into my mixer. I added some reverb, which looks like this, or that's delay. Reverb, which looks like this. Delay, which looks like this. And then I added this auto pan, which took the pan up super, so it's like super panned back and forth, and put the depth up a lot too. So it's just basically really wide going back and forth, which I thought was a pretty cool effect. Then I kind of layered it over this, so together it kind of sounds like this. All right, so this video is getting a little long. I don't want to take up too much more of your time. So basically what I did here was I added just a couple more synths to, like, I think I added a pad and then another sort of lead synth, which are mixed pretty quietly, so you can't really hear them. It just adds a little bit more as the second part of the first section, chorus, whatever you want to call it, continues. So it just sounds like this together. So again, you know, not really prevalent in the mix, but just kind of adds a little bit more atmosphere to kind of give a little bit more something. Okay, so then I decided to have this sort of break where I just wanted a really beautiful, like, airy sort of pad, just kind of carrying it and building back into another section. So I chose this. This is another GMS preset called Moon Landing. I took it into here, I think. Did I? Oh, you know what? I didn't even process this, so that sounded good just the way it was, and I was happy with it. So I added this little pad hit, which is something I got from a pack. It sounds like this. And you may be able to hear sort of like this modulation thing going on with that. Basically what I did was I processed it by adding, first of all, I added some delay, and then I added this M audio pan, which, again, this panning effect that I've been using. And what I did was I automated the rate to essentially, it starts off really fast and then it goes slower throughout. So it kind of gives like almost like an LFO type effect to that sound as it carries on into the next section. All right, so in this next section, all I did was, here, I'll mute everything. So basically, the drums and everything kick back in with the, we have our sub or our bass, which I just noticed. I don't know why this got moved there. That should be there. So all this stuff filters back in, and then it kicks in, boom, and we have our pad, our airy pad that continues on, and another pad right here, which sounds like this. Oh, you know what? It's the same pad. I just added another note to give it a little bit more. So when that kicks in, it sounds like this. So then I just that keeps going and it goes in here, and then I bring in this original synth chords, which is that sort of organ sound, which I added the warp depth to, which makes it sound like this. So then I went ahead and went back into the original section, which I brought everything that was originally in, plus I actually added this ride, which kind of sounds like this. And yeah, I just felt like I needed a little bit something to differentiate between the last section and this section, and I felt like that, just that little tiny subtle thing did it. All right, and so then the last thing that I want to show you guys is just this synth solo that I added, which sounds like this. So I use this mini synth, which is another stock FL Studio plugin, and it's a pretty cool plugin. It's pretty simple. What I did was see if I can remember exactly what I did. I put it onto a saw square, transposed it to the middle here, modified it 50.4%, added a little bit of noise, 12, and then I think this stayed the same. In effects, I went ahead and added some delay. No, the delay's off, but I did add a chorus, which just made it sound huge and really wide. And then I think that's all I did to the sound within the preset. So then I loaded it into my mixer, which I added some EQ onto it, another vinyl, some more reverb, some more delay, and then an auto pan, which looks like this. So you can kind of see how fast it's panning as well. But 6 pan law, 50% depth, with a rate at 2.6. And then I had this little delay automation clip, which I added over these long notes where it's like kind of the bendy effect. So just wanted a little bit more delay to kind of add to that section as it went. Thanks so much for watching the video, guys. If you liked it, please go ahead, hit that like button. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing. Don't forget to hit that bell notification, and always remember, your favorite producer was once exactly where you are. Peace! Peace.